Okay, so today we're going to talk about Reconstruction. Not all of Reconstruction, basically the three big plans that were created to kind of reconstruct the U.S. after the Civil War. Now, when I'm talking about Reconstruction, I'm talking about the fact that the Civil War is over now. It ended in 1865, and this is when Reconstruction is going to start. And Reconstruction is going to consist of a lot of different elements, but mainly what we have to focus on is rebuilding the South and creating a nation that's once again unified in some form or fashion. The southern states were incredibly damaged after the Civil War because most of the war was fought in the South, and we talked a little bit in another flip lecture about Sherman's total war, where he burned all of the land as he marched to the Atlantic Ocean. And so it's going to be very costly. Not just that, though. Another issue that we face with Reconstruction is that the Civil War is going to be known as the deadliest war in American history. We had over 600,000 Americans die during the Civil War, and that is because both sides were Americans. We were fighting a war within America. And then we had another 500,000+ men who were wounded, and many of them are going to have wounds that will stay with them for a lifetime. Amputated arm or leg, blindness, deafness, something that is going to affect their everyday life. And so with that magnitude of men destroyed or crippled, that's going to be an issue all on its own in the South and in the North. We had over 3 million men who ended up fighting during the Civil War, and there were women involved as well, just not at that magnitude. And so even those who did not come back with any physical scars are going to come back with emotional scars. So having to figure out a plan where we can bring the South back into the United States is going to prove difficult, because the North is kind of going to, well, some of the North, not all of them, are going to want to punish the South, and the South is just not wanting to be punished. They've been through a lot, and so it's where can we find that balance is going to be the issue. But before we talk about the plans, I want to talk about what we call the Reconstruction Amendments, and that's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Now, I've really simplified this for you. One word goes with each of those. So when you think about the 13th Amendment, you need to think about free. The 14th Amendment is citizen, and the 15th Amendment is vote. The 13th Amendment is going to free the slaves. The 14th Amendment is going to make the former slaves citizens. And the 15th Amendment is going to give the men, former slaves, the men, the right to vote. Women are not going to get the right to vote for for many more years. Not until the 19th Amendment. And so when you think about these, I want you to think free citizen vote, 13th, 14th, 15th, free citizen vote. The first plan we're going to talk about is Lincoln's plan. President Lincoln was the president at the end of the Civil War, which ended in April 1865. And he knew going into that, even before the war ended, he wanted a plan. And in his second inaugural address, he had a great speech, and within it he said, with malice towards none and charity towards all, basically meaning, we were all Americans, and he did not want to punish the South for the Civil War. He kind of wanted to move past that and work together to reunify and kind of repair what had been damaged because of the Civil War. So his plan had 4 parts. Number 1, he wanted to pardon the Confederate officials, which means he wanted to forgive them. Basically, when the war ended and the North won, the Confederacy was considered treasonous. If you served in the Confederate Army, and then in a way, well, not in a way, you were committing treason against your country. You were fighting against your country. You were being disloyal to your country. And honestly, treason is punishable by death. But Lincoln said, we're not going there. We've already lost too many people in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to forgive, wash away, pardon the men who fought in the Confederate Army. Number 2, he wanted a quick formation of new state governments. He said, we need to do this quickly. We need to move the states back in. There's 11 states that were in rebellion. They are now, totally demolished. They have no currency because they were using Confederate money. They have no government that's going to align with the United States government. So we want them to quickly make new governments. And with that, we want them to vote, and we want them to send representatives to the U.S. Congress. We want their say. It's very important. It was very important to Lincoln that all states be heard in the U.S. Congress. We know that the U.S. Congress makes the laws, and he wanted to make sure that the Southern voices were heard. Number 4, he wanted to create the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau was going to assist former slaves, set up schools and hospitals, and distribute clothes, food, and fuel, especially in the South. He wanted these slaves who had nothing when they were freed are going to need basic living. They're going to need living expenses. They're going to need food. They're going to need shelter. They're going to need clothes. He wants to educate them because they had not been given the ability to learn how to read and write as slaves. And so when we free the slaves, it's like, okay, you're freed. Now what do? We have nowhere to go. We have nothing to eat. We have no money. And so he wanted to create this organization that was going to help ease slaves, now freedmen, into society. But in April 1865, right after the Civil War ended, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. We could spend forever talking about the Lincoln assassination, but what you need to remember is that Lincoln went to a play, he was assassinated, he died the next day across the street, and with his assassination, the vice president then is moved up to become the president of the United States, and his vice president was Andrew Johnson. Now here's the odd thing. Lincoln was a Republican, but they had put Andrew Johnson on Lincoln's ticket, and Andrew Johnson was a slave-holding Democrat. They put him on it because they wanted to bring in some Southern votes when Lincoln was running for presidency. And so here comes Johnson, a Democrat. The Congress is controlled by Republicans, and it's going to be a very bitter struggle there between Johnson and the Republican Congress. Of course, Johnson has a plan himself. First of all, he kind of liked Lincoln's plan because Lincoln's plan was pretty lenient on the South, who had been in rebellion, and he was not going to punish them for their rebellion. He was going to forgive them and bring them back. So Johnson liked that. So he wanted to use Lincoln's goals, but he also wanted immediate ratification of the 13th Amendment. He wanted all states to immediately ratify the 13th Amendment, which freed the slaves. Many Southern states had not ratified right away, and he said, okay, we fought this war, it's over. You have to ratify the 13th Amendment. That's step number 1. He also wanted all states to accept the federal government as the extreme authority. Johnson believed it was his job as president and not Congress's job or states' jobs to rebuild the nation. And so he wanted all states to recognize him and the federal government as the supreme authority. Number 4, he pardoned most white Southerners. So again, same thing that Lincoln was doing. He wanted to forgive the whites involved in the Civil War and the Confederacy. And then he wanted to return property to its owners. Lots and lots of Southern property had been seized by the Union Army as they had gone through and become victorious in these areas. And so he promised that land would be returned to these Southern plantation owners and property owners. But in order for the pardoning and the returning of property to happen, he said that white Southerners had, or former Confederate soldiers had to swear their allegiance to the United States, so had to pledge their loyalty. If they did that, then in return, the U.S. would pardon them and return their property if any had been taken. The Republicans didn't like Johnson's plan. There's going to be a huge, huge battle within the nation and between Johnson and the Republicans in Congress. It's going to get so far that Johnson is going to be voted and impeached, but acquitted in the Senate. It's a very sticky situation. Now, most Republicans in Congress at this time were fairly moderate. They didn't want anything extreme. We'd just been through a civil war. They were kind of willing to just say, I like Lincoln's plan, I like Johnson's plan, let's work with that. But there was a group within the Congress known as the Radical Republicans, and they wanted to punish the South for the Civil War. And so they're going to pass what's called the Congressional Plan, but it got nicknamed the Radical Republican Plan. It had two parts. Number one, they wanted to divide the South into 5 military districts, and they did that. They divided the southern states, the 11 states of rebellion, Confederate states, into 5 separate military districts, and they sent military into each of these states to be in charge. Think Hunger Games type situation here. The military was going to be the government in these states until the states got their act together, according to the Congress, and then they would be given their statehood and removed from the military districts. So the second part is, before the southern states could re-enter the Union and stop being in the military district, they had to do 2 things. They had to approve a new state constitution that gave all adult men a right to vote. So they had to basically recognize the 13th free, 14th citizen, and 15th vote amendments in order to re-enter the Union, and they had to add that into their state constitution. That is going to prove a difficult task. The South was willing to ratify the 13th and many the 14th, but they just, there's not going to be instant equality when the Civil War ends between the African Americans and the whites. It's just not going to happen. And it's a sad situation, but the South, many southern states did not want to ratify the 15th Amendment. But the Republican plan said you have to, the congressional plan said you have to if you want to become part of the United States again. Otherwise, you're going to be in a military district. And B, they had to ratify the 14th Amendment. So again, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment all had to be ratified. This plan is going to be very hard to do, but that is kind of one of the final plans. Eventually, Reconstruction is going to end. Many historians debate on whether Reconstruction was successful or not. Yes, it did bring the United States back together, but it did not give equality to African Americans. That is a battle they're going to fight for a very long time. So Reconstruction's goal of reuniting was successful, but all other goals under Reconstruction to bring equality and peace were not successful. One would believe once you study Reconstruction more, and we will talk much more about Reconstruction in class.